Hello, and welcome to People of the Pod, brought to you by American Jewish Committee. Each week, we take you beyond the headlines to help you understand what they all mean for America, Israel, and the Jewish people. I'm your host, Manya Brashear-Pashman.
שקיעה בהר יוקדת, אני חולמת ורואות עיניי, הגיא נערה קטנה יורדת, ובאש כלניות לוהט הגיא, את הפרחים לצרור תלקט לה, ובשבילים המתכסים בטל, אל אמא היא נחפזת וקוראת לה, הביטי מה הבאתי לך בשר. כלניות, 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 אדם גמרות אדמוניות.
Since the Hamas terror attacks of October 7, 2023, many university campuses have been riven by anti-Israel protests, demonstrations often unfortunately fueled by disinformation and rife with rhetoric that too often crosses the line into anti-Semitism. But even before October 7th, Israeli scholarship had become a target of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. The American Studies Association has boycotted Israeli academic institutions since 2013. The Association for the Advancement of Anthropology has refrained from formal collaborations with Israeli academic institutions. Even study abroad programs that give students an opportunity to live and study in Israel have come under scrutiny. Enter two scientists at MIT who see firsthand the consequences of academic boycotts and the damage it can cause to scholarship and scientific progress. To ensure Israeli scholars and their American colleagues can collaborate freely, foster research and innovation that benefits all of humanity, they formed the Kalaniyot Foundation, named after Israel's national flower. Dr. Hen and Ernest Fraenkel are with us now to discuss this initiative. Dr. Hen, Dr. Fraenkel, welcome to People of the Pod.
Thank you very much.
So I want to work backward here a bit with a purpose. I want to start by sharing with our audience a little about your research. Dr. Fraenkel, you work in health science technology. What is the goal of your research and scholarship? I mean, are there particular diseases you're trying to cure or treat?
Yeah, we are interested in the diseases that are the hardest to treat, ones like Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, where we don't really know the root cause. And we believe that by gathering many different kinds of data about genes and molecules, about RNA, and also about people's lived experience of these diseases and using computational models, we can identify new targets for drugs and hopefully better therapies.
Have you collaborated with Israeli scientists on this?
Yes, we collaborate with quite a few scientists all over the world, including top researchers in Israel.
And Dr. Hen, you are a nuclear physicist and you study the strongest force in nature, right? What is the goal of your research?
So my research is very much on the fundamental curiosity-driven science side of things. I am trying to understand how the fundamental building blocks of matter come about. We're building a new particle collider in the US called the Electron-Ion Collider. It's a $3 billion project funded by the Department of Energy, where we will try to understand why the proton, and from that nucleus, and all of us have mass, trying to understand how we get the proton to a specific spin, which is the reason that we can go into an MRI machine and image ourselves. And I also try to understand things like how do protons and neutrons interact with each other at extremely short distances, which tell us about exotic phenomena in the universe like neutron stars. So trying to understand really the fundamental building blocks of matter and how they come about.
Wow. And is there promising scholarship in this realm in Israel?
Yes, there's quite a few groups working in this area. I did my own training in Israel. I am a graduate of the Hebrew University for undergrad and Tel Aviv University for grad school. And actually, ever since I came to MIT, I've still been collaborating with colleagues from the Technion, Tel Aviv, Hebrew University, Weizmann, Ben Gurion. I've always had a strong collaboration with Israel, actually.
So, after October 7th, or maybe even leading up to it, what were you seeing when it came to support of Israeli scholarship and collaboration in your institutions, in your fields, in academia in general?
I think before October 7th, we were living in a bit of a bubble because MIT is a special place which is very deeply immersed in science and technology, where really, quite honestly, before October 7th, I had no hint that there were biases against Israel, Israelis, or Jews. I know that was not the experience in many other areas, especially in other fields. But things really turned 180 degrees on October 7th. And what we've seen since then has been deeply disturbing. That some of the boycotts that had been bubbling for years in the humanities suddenly burst forth into the sciences and the engineering fields in ways that are both global and also very local, seeing bias against individual researchers inside laboratories, as well as these kind of blanket attempts to boycott Israel.
And Dr. Hen, did you see the same?
Yes, definitely. I think, I work with a lot of international collaborations, and actually within the collaborations, because there's some structured bodies with bylaws and rules, it was very hard for anyone to object the presence of Israeli researchers. But what we have observed in many places is peer-to-peer collaborations dying down. We've seen a very significant social tax being applied to people who continue to collaborate with Israelis. And honestly, maybe in contrast a bit to what we know from academic boycotts in other areas that are very much politically driven, within the STEM, within exact sciences, biosciences, etc., the social taxing is actually much stronger because we have people who usually in STEM, people keep a very clear separation between the politics and then, what they view from the work in the lab, which is very clear and data driven and not a lot of room for opinions. It's very much exact. But on the other hand, working with an Israeli or collaborating with Israelis start costing other collaborations for other people will now not work. Then you get a problem. And that's what people really avoid. And that's how an academic boycott within the STEM areas is progressing. It's very deeply bound social tax that is just running in the air of the institutions.
So, what is the Kalaniyot Foundation doing to promote these collaborations? Can you give us some specific examples of projects or partnerships?
Yeah, so one of the things that we really believe in is that at the end of the day, actually, what we see also data shows is where there is existing strong collaboration, that peer to peer, that person to person connection is so strong that it's very hard to break that, right? You can go into my department and you can talk to people about Israel, but they know all and they know the person, right? And they might have a positive opinion about me or negative opinion about me, but whatever that opinion is, right, it's stronger than anything they will try to produce. And say, okay, maybe there's a political issue, but we know the researcher, we know the scientist, we know our colleagues. So the approach of Kalaniyot is to actually bring in more Israelis to campus, to bring in brilliant people who are excellent researchers that will come and enrich the academic environment, first and foremost through the scholarship, and second by the people that they are. Maybe Ernest, you want to continue with this?
So it's really this dual mission. We think that if we bring more top-notch Israeli scholars to U.S. campuses, it will normalize interaction with Israelis, humanize the Israeli. But there's a problem, right? Because if you just bring Israelis into campus environments that are hostile, they won't thrive. Many of them won't want to come, right? And so the other piece of it that's necessary is to build community. And that's something that we've been doing since October 7th of last year, trying to figure out how to do that. And what we found is face-to-face interaction is really critical. And so at MIT, we've been having weekly lunches of the Israelis, Jews, allies, everybody who felt isolated and left out of society by all the protests that were taking place. And the beautiful thing is that that started as a reaction, right? A sort of a safe place to retreat to. And it's actually become a wonderful, positive place. And still now, so far into this crisis, people are coming and actually the numbers are even growing. And so on a typical week, we get more than 100 people in person. We, of course, feed them lunch. And it's just a wonderful place where you can make friendships, develop academic collaborations, And Israelis realize that there is a community here that appreciates them and welcomes them, and it helps them thrive.
Because, of course, food is a vital currency, both on college campuses as well in Jewish life. Food heals all. But I am curious, in addition to building these thriving communities so that people are surrounded and comfortable, but are you also trying to build bridges with people who perhaps do tend to throw the word Israeli around in a negative capacity, but need to actually have some face-to-face contact? Or is that really not the purpose of Kalaniyot?
It's a yes and a no. We certainly have done that, right? So if you think about how it all started, very soon after October 7th, basically after the first protest on campus, at MIT, we went to talk to our president, three Jewish Israeli faculty, and we've asked her, we said, look, we hear from the students about what's happening in the dorms, what they're experiencing. It's really bad, and it's very hard to handle through the existing mechanisms. Please actually give us the budget. We'll get kosher food. I'm a Mizrahi. That's what I know how to do, feed people. Let's put everybody together, and let's make sure everybody feel welcome. And we also said, we'll be your bridge. We'll help the students communicate with administration through our guidance, right? We'll be able to filter, to guide them, but also to pick up on the important things that you need to know about. But then we said something else. We said, look, this is going to become very tough, also for the students who are protesting out right now. Because before Israel responded, but we knew exactly what happened in the kibbutzim, and we knew this is not going to be just another round with Gaza. This is going to be something different. So we've actually suggested to the president that alongside starting our group, we will start a parallel group of peers who we might disagree with politically and have different perspectives on the Middle East, but we know that they are reasonable people that we can talk to, that we can collaborate with, that we can work with despite or alongside disagreements. And so the idea was to start our lunch, to start a second lunch, and slowly through the faculty leadership bring the groups together. Some of it has worked, some of it didn't work. We used to meet once a week as the faculty and say, students tell us that this and this is happening. Can you maybe work with your students to tone that down? And they would tell us what's bothering them, etc. Getting the students to come together, that was a bigger lift and a challenging one. And there was another initiative that came about called the Third Space Lunch that maybe Ernest can elaborate more on.
Just to add a little bit to that. So the faculty leads from the other group came to speak to our students who were very respectful to them. The faculty listened quietly to the concerns of the Jewish students. And I think we did see an attempt by many of the faculty to bridge the gaps. Obviously, faculty are extremely, diverse group. We have extremists, we've got centrists, we've got moderates, and not everybody was trying to help, but many, many were. And I think that was very encouraging. And I've seen that continue throughout this. There are hidden allies there. The average faculty member probably doesn't really want to know too much about Israel or Palestine, doesn't want to have to understand the conflicts. They just want to go about their daily lives, teach what they love to teach, do the research that they love to do. And they are natural allies in trying to bring order back to campus. And the more that we can engage them, the better off it is.
But I think in terms of the formal program for Kalaniyot is really meant to bring in researchers and make sure that they have a supporting environment. And if people want to take that extra step of building bridges and building, that's all great, but it's not kind of a mandatory part of the program.
I get it. You really just want to foster academic research and progress and innovation, right? Put the political strife aside. You've named this foundation Kalaniyot after Israel's national flower. Can you describe for our listeners that flower and why you chose that name for this initiative?
The Kalaniyot looks a lot like a poppy. It's a red poppy. And during good times, there actually was an annual festival where Israelis would flock to the south in the area right around Gaza to see the bloom of this flower that would cover the otherwise fairly barren, quite honestly, countryside. And it was called the South Red, Darom Adom. And people would rush there to see it. And it takes place right around the time we're recording. People have been sending us photos from Israel in the last few weeks of these flowers, the more they hear about the program. And it's a sign that the winter is going to end and spring is going to come and everything will be renewed. And so it was the South in red in a sense that was all positive. And we think the same sort of thing is possible here, that while Israel is right now a touch point for conflict on campus, we want to see a time when Israel is just something like, of course, everybody wants to have some connection to Israel. That's where the best researchers are in every field. I often tell the story when I was first on the faculty here, one of my first assignees as an undergraduate advisee was somebody from Hawaii. And I asked him what he was going to do this summer, and he said he's going to Israel. I said, "Oh, really? What's your connection to Israel?" He said, "Oh, I don't have any." I thought, well, maybe he's a strong Christian. I asked him about that. He said, no, I don't have any particular faith. I just heard it's Startup Nation, and I want to go and experience it. And I just think how many students today is their first association with Israel Startup Nation? Probably not that many anymore, but we can get back to that and realize that it's more than startups, right? It's basic science, it's the arts, it's culture. And so there's so much that Israel has to offer the world. And we want to get back to the point where that's the first thing people think about Israel.
So this initiative did start at MIT, but it appears to be sprouting, to use a pun. It appears to be sprouting on other campuses. Dartmouth is developing a chapter, and Penn, right, the University of Pennsylvania. Are they being led by fellow scientists who see the consequence of this scholastic snub, for lack of a better word?
So at each university, and there are several others in the works that are still working their way through the administration, each university, and by the way, this is not a renegade effort. At each university, the faculty form a faculty board. We encourage them to find a diverse group. So it's not all the sciences. On our board and on those boards, you'll see many members of humanities departments, not all Jews, not all Israelis. And these diverse faculty boards are people who are aligned with the goals, and we have bylaws. This is a program entirely about positivity. It's not attempting to suppress anybody else's speech. It's not attempting to make any political points. It's a purely academic program. Will help restore the image of Israel as a place of academic excellence and help the United States maintain its academic edge through those collaborations.
And I think you're hitting on a very unique point, right? And that is that this is entirely faculty-led program. When you think about the role of faculty in universities, especially faculty from STEM fields, right? We don't lead a lot of things in the academic world that are not our research, right? Honestly, why am I here and not in Google, right? I would probably make a much bigger salary working for Google these days. I'm here because I really care about my research. Those open questions I really want to explore. And that's what I'm doing. So I'm teaching my class and I'm focusing on my research. And me is everybody else around me. But that's what we do. So there is a very high activation energy to get the faculty to do something that is not their research, their own research. But once you do that, faculty is a force of nature. We're here to stay, right? We're tenured, we're going to be until retirement. We run the place eventually. So it's both to activate the people who can really make an impact from within in a very strong way. That's number one. Who have decades of connections, right? Well, before the challenge, I have my 10 years of collaborations here at MIT. Ernest has a lifetime of more than 10 years of collaborations here, right? And many of us, and people remember those connections, right? Remember how we teach together, how I learned something from my lab and stuff like that. We have personal connections. So it is really the first and uniquely faculty-led program that is a very hard thing to come by to see faculty do that. I think there's a lot of power. And that's also why it's such an academically focused program, because that's what we know how to do. There's many other organizations who can combat anti-Semitism and can give anti-Semitism training and Title VI and all that. And we don't do it not because it's not important, but because we are not the people who bring in any unique expertise in those areas. But when it comes to research, collaboration, connections with Israel around those things, we are the ones who can really promote it from within in a way that's unparalleled to anyone else. And that's, I think, the strongest point of Kalaniyot, the faculty leadership.
In other words, you're not activists, you're not advocates. That's not what you set out to do. You are researchers, scientists who just want to do research and science.
And want to see everybody around us do the best research and science possible, which means engaging with the brightest minds anywhere in the world, and that includes Israel. And we don't want to see that door shut down. And there's no hiding it. Ernest and I are Zionists. We're not going to shy away from that. And we think that an academic boycott in the STEM is a risk to Israel. Israel doesn't have oil, right? What Israel has is the Jewish mind. And that mind is the thing that helps Israel. And that mind is the thing that helps the world. And we can go on and on about inventions and discoveries that came out of Israel and Israelis and Jews for the benefit of mankind. So both for the benefit of Israel and all of humanity, we don't want to see the Israeli academy get isolated. It's going to be bad for all of us.
Now, I know that there is a program at Indiana University called Olamot. focusing on the humanities. Does this only apply to STEM fields, or do you also have partnerships and collaborations developing across multiple disciplines?
Yes, absolutely. This is a program that's open to all academic fields. And each university will craft a slightly different program, we're sure. At MIT, because we're STEM dominated, our Kalaniyot program is dominated by STEM, but it's not exclusively STEM here either. We do have deep involvement from several of our board members in the humanities. Many of the people who come to our programming are in the humanities. We're hoping that some of the scholars whom we will select in our first cohort of postdoctoral and sabbatical visitors will be in the humanities. But that's going to be a bigger component of it at other universities, such as Dartmouth and Penn, where they have huge humanities programs.
And are you getting mostly support, or are you getting any pushback from faculty members?
So this is really fascinating. Early on, when we first started formulating this program, we wrote a memo explaining, a letter explaining why we were doing this for something called the faculty newsletter, which is usually a place where people write fairly anti-Israel things. And we kind of braced ourselves for the pushback, and nothing came back. There was no pushback. Because if you believe in academic values in the United States, unless you're a hardcore BDS person, there's really nothing objectionable here. Our goal is to bring brilliant scholars to campus and encourage them to be able to work broadly without regard to nationality, religion, anything else, any other protected category. And so we were very pleased. And initially, the administration was curious. They were interested. They wanted to review exactly what we're doing. The MIT administration went through everything we were doing, and they gave us the thumbs up, and they've now been helping us make connections. And behind the scenes, I understand that, some provosts and presidents occasionally talk about this when they meet, and they, tell each other it's not a bad thing to have at your university.
I remember when we got people to know the program, we met with a very high-ranking individual at MIT. And that person said, look, MIT stands on three legs: research, education, and entrepreneurship. Israel excels in all three. Of course, we want those connections. Of course, we want those collaborations. And who in the right mind can say that this is anything political? Right now, I'm sure that some people will try at some point. But like I said, we've worked very hard on the language and the messaging to make sure that the language and messaging reflects the way we really see it as a very strong academic program.
So, Dr. Hen, I do want to ask you a personal question. I have read that as a child, you navigated some pretty significant learning disabilities stemming from dysgraphia. You have difficulty translating your thoughts into written form. But the assessment to determine those disabilities also determined that you had a unique gift for abstract comprehension, the ability to conceptually pare down complex ideas to their fundamental core. So I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, what is at the fundamental core of these academic boycotts?
Honestly, I do believe that the academic boycotts come from anti-Semitism. That's the core. I do believe that a lot of people who engage in that, not understanding that that is what they're doing, I'd like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think that a lot of people do see a difference between anti-Zionism, anti-Israel, anti-Semitism, right? Which I personally do not share. And that's a different point, which is allowed. But I think at the end of the day, trying to isolate Israel eventually is, from a top level, an attempt to bring down the country. Because that's the core. The core of Israel is its academia. That's really where it all starts. And if we don't have academia, if we're attacking the Israeli academy, you're attacking Israel. And any person who takes the time to learn about the Israeli academy, who listens to speeches by the head of Tel Aviv University about the judicial reform in Israel, who listens to the head of the Israeli National Academy about how he sees democracy and what he sees about the war and situation, you would learn that the Israeli academy is really the hallmark of an independent academia that stands by itself as an independent body that really promotes research and good for the world. And anyone who attacks that either doesn't know or doesn't care to know. And I'd like to hope that most people don't know, and once they'll know and appreciate the people, they will see differently. But there is a core that doesn't want to know. And we need to make sure that that core remains as small as possible.
Dr. Fraenkel, do you agree?
I'm by nature a centrist and not a political person. And I also have learned over time that it's very hard to understand other people's motivations. But I do think that one of the paths to it, to solving the problem, is to rehumanize Israel and Israelis in the minds of the people who are currently protesting. And I think we'll have good results if we do that.
I'm curious, we've been talking a lot about Israeli research and innovation. Can you share a piece of Israeli innovation that you've heard about recently that maybe our audience has not and should know about?
I was just at a conference yesterday, and one of the best talks yesterday, this was at a conference on ALS, was given by a researcher from the Weizmann Institute, Eran Hornstein. And he spoke about an entirely new way to analyze what goes on inside cells in the course of disease. He calls it organellomics. I think it's kind of a mouthful, but it was completely innovative. No one has done anything similar. It allows you to get a wonderful view of all the different processes that are going on in a cell at a very high level in a way that is experimentally very accessible. And I think it's really going to transform a lot of how we research diseases and may lead to some, rapid advances in some of these tough cases.
Yeah. I can add to that, from the more industry side of things, right? We all have technology in our pockets, in our homes, in our offices, developed in Israel. The most advanced processors by Intel are built on an architecture that was developed in Haifa. Apple has engineering centers in Israel. Facebook has engineering centers in Israel. NVIDIA, all of us use Israeli technology day in and day out. Well, we know it or we don't. But there's not a single person in the Western world that does not rely on Israeli technology sometime, someplace, some point in his day.
And when you were at that conference, Dr. Fraenkel, or Dr. Hen, when you consider that, when you pull out your phone and consider the many ways in which we use Israeli technology, does that further validate, does it affirm that what you are doing is the right thing to do and that this will only benefit humanity at large?
In biology, we often do these experiments where we delete a gene, we make it stop working, and we see what happens to the cell or to the animal that we're studying, right? And just do the thought experiment. What would happen to American science if it didn't have these strong collaborations with Israel? And be weaker in consumer electronics, and be weaker in AI, be weaker in all the underpinnings of all the technology that we're all walking around with every day. We'd be weaker in healthcare. Think about the contribution that Israel made to understanding what was going on during the COVID pandemic, right? It's just shocking how much we would lose from this small country not being there. And absolutely, when we think about that, it just drives us even more to try to get this program to spread across all the best universities in the United States. And hopefully we'll make inroads in Europe as well and really bring Israel back to the forefront in everybody's mind as a place where positive things are happening.
Well, thank you both for joining us so much and for sharing about this program. I really do appreciate it. It's fascinating and refreshing to learn that academics are supporting academics.
Thank you very much. Real pleasure to speak with you.
If you missed last week's episodes, be sure to tune in for my conversation with AJC Berlin director Remco Limhus about Germany's recent election results and the rise of its far-right party. And listen to a live conversation between AJC Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer Jason Isaacson and U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff. They sat down at an event in Washington, D.C. to introduce AJC's Center for a New Middle East. Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by AJC. Our producer is Atara Lakritz. Our sound engineer is TK Broderick. You can subscribe to People of the Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or learn more at ajc.org/peopleofthepod. The views and opinions of our guests don't necessarily reflect the positions of AJC. We'd love to hear your views and opinions or your questions. You can reach us at peopleofthepod@ajc.org. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to tell your friends, tag us on social media with hashtag #PeopleOfThePod, and hop on to Apple Podcasts to rate us and write a review to help more listeners find us. Tune in next week for another episode of People of the Pod.